Hello and welcome to Save Your Sanity. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. I'm delighted that you're here. I hope you're coming back from having enjoyed a previous podcast, or it's your first time here and you're looking forward to what you might discover. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a very important topic. They're all really important topics, of course, but this is an internal topic for you. How to stop striving to be good enough for a narcissist. Well, that's a big topic. And of course, the big question is, why should I be striving to be good enough for a narcissist? But we're going to cover all of that this evening. And I hope it's very helpful to you. So many vital pieces of this information. And we want to be right on it. So if you've been enjoying being part of Save Your Sanity podcast, I really invite you to show that by supporting the program. Go to patreon.com/saveyoursanity. Patreon.com/saveyoursanity. And if you haven't gone to Patreon before, it's a place where you can pledge a couple of dollars a month or $15 one time or whatever you'd like to do. So it just shows your support, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you for those of you who have been donating. And if I can help you at any time, you find me at FOR relationship, HELP.com. So we're going to be talking about why we keep striving to be good enough for a narcissist, or my term for them, a hijackal. Well, why would we use our energy that way? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, when we were children, we knew inherently that we had to please the parent or whomever those giants were in our life that brought us home from the hospital. We get into a habit of judging how they're doing. Are they liking us? Aren't they liking us? And we calibrate that out, and we keep trying to get them to take care of us, get them to notice us, get them to like us, get them to approve of us, get them to validate us and demonstrate a lot of interest. And so it's not very much of a stretch to realize that we might also keep doing that when we're adults. And hijackals love to find people who do keep doing that when they're adults, because that means, you're going to do everything you can to please me. Well, that is just about perfect, right? So why do we not feel good enough anyway? What do we have to prove? The fact that you're drawing breath and taking up space makes you good enough to express what you feel and think and need and want just by virtue of breathing and taking up space. And yet, if you came from a family, particularly where that wasn't enough, where that wasn't good enough, and you were always pushing, striving, trying to do better, then you were it was a pre-existing condition for you. And so you keep doing it. So I'm hoping that through this podcast, you'll reflect on a few new things, see them from a different slant, feel differently about them after you've thought about them. And I'm going to give you lots of information to do that. So hijackals, whether of any variety, narcissist or otherwise, they look for two particular kinds of people, and they're kind of on either end of the spectrum. They look for people who have been pre-groomed by their earlier family or earlier relationships, so it's not too much work for them. And then they look for the ones who are a challenge, like, could I bring that person down? Could I get them to start second guessing themselves? And of course, everybody in between too. So it's not just all or nothing. They have degradations of how they like to demonstrate their power over. And so that's imperative to realize that if you've already been pre-groomed, you're likely to give in, you're likely to want to please them, you're likely to go the extra mile and have their back and do all the things, basically, that you really wish they would do for you. And that's one of the big problems we have to overcome. No matter where we are in life, we have one big problem. If we have it, we have to overcome it. And that is actually thinking that other people are like you. You know how you think that they will be like you, so you explain something to them and they don't get it or they're not interested and they're not like you, but you think, "Oh, I'll just explain it a little more." And a big piece of emotional maturity is to realize that other people are not like you, that they don't want to be like you. Maybe they can't be like you because of their previous circumstances. So, no matter what topic we're talking about, really important to realize other people are not like me. So, once I realize they're not like me, I need to be curious about them and learn about them and make decisions about them, because you can't have equality and equity, reciprocity and mutuality in some certain circumstances, particularly if people don't have the same values or vision or beliefs that you do. And I mean beliefs about how relationships should work, beliefs about what respect looks like, all those kind of beliefs. So very important calibration here. So if you've been pre-groomed, that means you already know that you look to others for approval, you look to others to please them, you go that extra mile and all, as I said, then they're very happy because they think, oh, all I have to do is love bomb, get that person on my side, get them to believe that everything that I said is real, believe my future faking. And if you don't know about future faking, look up that episode of my podcast. But they want you to believe the future faking, get very involved in it, and then they can get you. And in my book, Escaping the Hijackal Trap, if you haven't read that one, you can get it on Amazon. There's a whole chapter in there called The Gotcha Factor, how they perpetrate getting you. So you want to know that one too. So on the one hand, we have the pre-groomed people. On the other hand, the pre-groomed people are already ready to give in. They'll do anything. And on the other hand, we have the people that look like a challenge. And so what they want to do is to bring those people down. They want to get them second guessing themselves. They want to undermine their confidence. And that's where they find their power source. Either way, it ends up with you not feeling good enough. And they're happy to tell you you are not good enough. You know that, right? They are happy to tell you you're not good enough and you will never be good enough. So you strive to be better and you accommodate their wishes a little more and you do exactly what they ask you to do and you refrain from doing what they told you not to do and you compromise. Anything. I'm doing all the things you're supposed to do to have a happy, healthy relationship, and it keeps getting more and more one-sided. Well, one thing you know about hijackals is that when they tell you you should do this and you do it, they're going to move the marker because they're never going to let you measure up, because that brings you to an equal place and they're not having it. They're not having equal in any form. Just not possible. Now and again, they'll give you the illusion of equality and equity, but they're not having it because they must be superior. So obviously, you can't ever be equal. So very, very important. So here you are, healthy person, maybe a little on the passive side, maybe a little predisposed to people please, and they see you and they think, I can keep this person always feeling not good enough. And then they can undermine the person who's very successful, take their confidence away, and do the same to them. But they're going to move the markers and they're going to blame shift. You know, there's a whole episode on blame shifting. You know, that's when you say, you know, I feel really poorly treated, or I'd like this or that. And they say, that's not me, that's you. You know, so they shift the blame to you when you're endeavoring to talk to them about your feelings or what you would prefer. So they move the markers and they blame shift and then they past blast. And I did a whole episode on that too. So as soon as one thing is said, they give you every time you've ever done it, right? And that's past blasting. I'm going to blast the whole past at you to wear you down and tear you down. And by the time that's been repeated many times as well, you're going to be exhausted. And you're not gonna know how to please them because they're like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads because she who will not be pleased is the Red Queen. And hijackals are they who will not be pleased. They'll be pleased by other people out in the community, but they won't be pleased by you. Why? Because, as I say so often, hijackals paint a public picture of perfection, while at home they provide a private place of pain. So at home, you can't get it right because that would mean that you would be close to equality for a hot second, and they're not having any. So if you're used to striving, if you're used to striving to avoid blame or shame or criticism or ridicule because you were raised in a hijackal family, you are pre-groomed to find a hijackal partner. So there's two things to think about here: your family of origin and how you may or may not have been pre-groomed, and then the situation in which you find yourself, or the situation that you have left and are endeavoring to heal from. These thoughts will help you with that healing and recovery process. So we have this conundrum. We can't be perfect. Perfection doesn't exist. But if you had parents who wanted you to strive for perfection, and you always thought, I could be more perfect, I could be more perfect, I could do that, you can't. Perfection is paralyzing. It doesn't exist. It's something to strive for no good reason. You know, oh, a long time ago, I remember I was so excited. I had read a book, so excited, and I read it 2 or 3 times, and I could hardly wait to go to hear the author speak. And I lived in Canada, and I came down to Los Angeles to hear this author and spend a week with a bunch of people who were sort of in the same brain mind revolution that I was in at the time. And I heard the woman speak, and she said, she wasn't a great speaker, which was disappointing, but she said this one thing that really stood out for me. And you know how parents tell you if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So you're not supposed to be a quitter. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And she said this most wonderful thing. She said, if it's really so worth doing, isn't it worth doing halfway? And, yes, it is, because it's worth doing. And yet we could be trapped in that idea that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And so we never have a feeling of good enough. We never have a feeling of enough to get by. We are always pushing for that perfection, and that perfection does not exist. So it's very important. And if you are feeling like you have to be perfect in order to have parents pleased with you, or some adult pleased with you, there's a power dynamic that went on there. Then you get into a relationship with a hijackal, and they are the ones who want to be the arbiter of perfect. So you can never reach it. But when you get into this perfectionist model, or this perfectionist way of being, there's a terrible conundrum, because in order to strive, you have to take a risk. And if you take a risk, you may or may not be appreciated for taking the risk. But if you fail, then you've lost the perfectionism. So it's a no-win situation. And that's the way it is with hijackals too. So many people become focused on perfectionism because they think perfection will allow them to avoid rejection. Does that make sense to you? That if I try so hard to be perfect, I will not be rejected. And I think that the rejection part of that equation is much bigger than the perfection part. I think the fear of rejection is much bigger emotionally than the striving for perfection. But if we've got that all hooked into us from earlier in our life, maybe a school, maybe a team, maybe a sport that you did, perfection, perfection, perfection. unattainable. And so important to understand if that was in your past, because this would be something that the hijackal would hook into. And so it's the same with a hijackal partner. And this perfection, as I said, is paralyzing. So if you don't risk, you're wrong. If you risk, you're wrong. And if you fail, you're doubly wrong. So it becomes very difficult to know what to do when you're with a hijackal partner. And this is why I said that even perfection can't and won't cut it. It will not cut through that you being good enough in a relationship with a narcissist or some other kind of hijackal. It's very defeating, but it's very liberating to realize that you can't ever achieve that, and yet they keep demanding that you do. And at some point, your opportunity is to break the cycle, to actually see that this is impossible. It is an impasse of grand proportions. It can't happen. And when you sit back and see it, that you could run after something as hard as you can, and they keep moving the marker, you will never get there. But if they can keep you striving to do what they want you to do for the hope that then they will approve of you, validate you, or perhaps love you, and you've already been through that a few times and you know that's not where it ends. It is not love. It is faux love at best. It's something that looks a little bit like what you wanted to feel, but it's not real, because hijackals don't really have love to give you. More, they have uses for you. So to stop striving means you have to see this very clearly. And maybe you need some help with that. And if you need some help with that, I'm always happy to work with you, because it's something that you can't see from the outside often. But if these things are causing you to nod your head and say, oh, I think that feels right, I think that feels good, come on over to beaclient.com. And I have an opportunity for new clients there for only $97 for the first hour. So come on over to beaclient.com, because it's really difficult to see inside yourself from being inside yourself. It's helpful to have someone who's well versed in this. And I've told you before, I had 2 hijackal parents. Of course, I married a hijackal. I divorced one. I co-parented one, and I was a hijackal magnet. And that's why I do this work, because there was no one to help me. Even when I went for professional help 25 years ago, there just wasn't enough help. And so I dedicated my expertise to providing that help. That's also why I have the Emerging Empowered community for you. And if that interests you, it's a community totally off social media. If that interests you, please come and join in at joinintoday.com. Joinintoday.com. And there are lots of wonderful things that you get for being a member over there. And it's sitting there all ready for you. So we need to break this cycle. First of all, we need to sit back and see the cycle. Yes, I have been on that wheel. I have been in that rat race. I have been striving only to never get anywhere except go around it again. So see that cycle. Then see the story of not ever being good enough. Who decides if you're good enough? Hopefully it's you. It's not other people. So I'm inviting you at that point to become self-referent, to look into yourself and say, do I think I'm a good person? Never mind what the hijackal has said, or any hijackal has said, or any non-hijackal has said for that matter. But to look within yourself and say, do I believe I'm a good person? What do I do that demonstrates I'm a good person? Make a big list of that and see that as the story that is true for you. Not the hijackal holding and moving the carrot all the time, but approve of yourself. Find that within yourself to say, I am good enough. I am a good person for all of these reasons. And then change that story with the hijackal to say, no, it is not all right with me to keep striving to do something that never has an ending. I can never get there. It will always be withheld from me. And once you do that, you can lay it down like, whoa, I don't have to keep walking on eggshells. I don't have to keep striving for the approval of someone of whom I don't approve. I've told that story about my mother in previous podcasts, so I won't tell you again, but the big learning of that story that I've told before is that I was looking for my mother to approve of me, but I didn't approve of my mother. So when I had the big aha, it was I was waiting for the approval of someone of whom I don't approve. And that may be true for you too with the hijackal. And then the next step is to behave differently and make decisions that support you so that you can stop striving to be good enough for a hijackal or a narcissist. I hope this is something that will help you see clearly as you listen to this episode and see the possibility for doing something differently, the possibility for change, and recognizing within yourself that, yes, you are good enough and you do not need anyone else to tell you so. So until we talk again, take very good care of yourself. Remind yourself you're good enough in so many ways. You matter. You're precious. And I'll look forward to talking with you again soon. Hello, everybody. You can tell that I decided to shorten my podcast. So I am doing that. I am reducing the length of the podcast to somewhere around 20 minutes. The reason for that is that I looked at all the statistics and all of the things that have 48, the episodes that have like 48,000 listens and things are all somewhere around 20 minutes. So I thought, maybe you get tired after 22 minutes. So I will slow that down. And if you have a comment about that, I'd love to see that tonight because this is the first one that I've purposefully made shorter. All right, so let's see what's here. Yes, Simply Savvy said, I made it. I can stay, I hope. Yes, too. I hope you can. Um, and Simply Savvy say the never fulfilled desire to please our parents. Yes, the impossible dream of a pleasing parents who are dedicated to not being pleased, to withhold their approval, withhold their love. Yes, yes. And then we go out and replicate them by choosing a partner who is doing the very same thing. Or maybe it was a total surprise to you, having been raised in a happy, healthy home, to find yourself with a hijackal who love bombed you and you thought they were just about perfect. And then to find, oh, now I'm in this circumstance. That can happen too. Simply Savvy says, when our parents are never pleased, never validate, we continue seeking it into adulthood until we realize and break the pattern. Hopefully, we break the pattern. And she or he says, it's easy to point the finger at the abuser, but we will never break the cycle unless we address what makes us attractive and vulnerable to hijackals in the first place. Yes, I tell my clients that all the time. Let's solve the problem with the hijackal, and then let's make you hijackal proof so that it won't happen again. I have lots of courses and things on my website for relationship help. .com and courses to help you with these things too. Hi, Ernesto. And he says, well, I don't want to do that. True, I used to be a perfectionist. Today I strive for excellence. For perfection, you need external validation. Excellence is defined by you. Yeah, maybe on a deeply philosophical basis, but I think I'm pretty perfect just when I look in the mirror and say, I think you're doing okay, girl. So perfect Totally unattainable. Nothing is perfect. Even a rose is only perfect for a few minutes and then it starts to deteriorate. Um, but we can accord ourselves, as you say, excellence. We could even accord ourselves to use the term perfect for me. I'm absolutely perfect for what I want to be. I'm perfectly living according to my values. We don't do anything perfectly. So those things may be elusive, but perfection is not desirable. It's impossible to attain almost. And so if we're going after a goal that really isn't attainable, and anyway, who wants to be perfect? That's a good question. So I think excellence is a good way to go at it, Ernesto. Good for you. And Simply Savvy says, it's hard for me not to respond constantly because you describe everything so well as if it's from my own mind. Well, there we go. I'm glad that it's ringing a bell for you. We come to expect perfectionism from ourselves and best beat ourselves up, even if a hijackal isn't doing it for us. Oh, yes. Yes, and you're welcome. We definitely will take on the task. Whatever we have learned as a child, we will perpetuate within ourselves until we have that aha moment and say, I'm still doing what I thought I needed to do to keep the parents happy. Does it fulfill me? Is it what I want to do? Is it who I am now? Are those things actually the case? So it's very important for us to, grow up our ideas, grow up our experience, and catch up with it to say, as an adult, you get to create your life. Many times I'll say to people, until you do your own work, you are actually dragging around a very heavy bag of emotional clutter, and you may not have ever looked in the bag. You just complained about how heavy it is. And really, that's the therapeutic process, is we open the bag together and take it out one piece at a time. So I just want to remind everybody that um, it takes 20 seconds after you hit send for me to see this. And if you have a comment or a question, any question on toxic relationships, I'm happy to answer it for you. And if 30 seconds go by and there is nothing appearing on my screen as a question or a comment, then I go bye-bye. And that's the way it works on Monday nights here. So there's no new comments there right now. So I'll start my 30-second countdown in my mind. But this whole myth of perfection, if we bought into it, now is the time to give it back. You won't get a refund, but you can just throw it away. It is not necessary. In my opinion, it's not even desirable. Sometimes when I watch the Olympics, I wonder, you know, say a gymnast, the whole focus is to get 10 out of 10. And yet the entire focus is them taking off points. So they only tell you what you did poorly. It's very difficult. And that's sometimes the mindset that we have about ourselves. We only dwell on what we do poorly instead of what we do really well, what we excel at, as Ernesto says. And excel doesn't have to mean that you're at the top of the game, top of the pile, and everybody thinks so. It means that you've met your own standard, your own expectation. And then you can see if you'd like to up it a little bit. And that's important. Hi, Alicia. It's strange. Thanks for mentioning the growing up of experience. You're welcome. Oh, I love that. All out of bubblegum. I have that on a poster here that I really love. Something about bubblegum. Yeah. So All Out of Bubblegum says it's possible to salvage a relationship. Is it possible to salvage a relationship with my mother? My father is the hijackal and she is his enabler. I had always believed her and we're close until I recently tried to address some issues. Yes, it's possible to salvage a relationship, but the closeness of that relationship may need a whole lot of calibration. If you see your mother as an enabler and she doesn't see herself that well, enablers don't like to be criticized. And I know that you would probably want to be giving her insight so that she could have some relief from what she's doing and have a better life. But we have to be very careful how we do that. So you can salvage the relationship because you see her more clearly. But if you're endeavoring to salvage the relationship and hope she's going to see things more clearly, that may be a big ask. So if you can accept that she's an enabler and maybe have some boundaries, it's really important to have boundaries with parents who are enabling or hijackal when we're an adult, and to know that you deserve to have the boundaries. You are an adult, and to be an emotionally mature adult, to be an emotionally fit adult, you have to be willing to know what your boundaries are, express them, and maintain them. And that's very important when we get with hijackal parents. You know, I had to do that. I'm an only child, as I said, and I have 3 children. So when my parents would go sideways in the presence of my children, we would leave, and they knew we were going to. But the important part was I expressed the boundaries. You know, if this, or this happens, we will leave immediately. And I will not mention it. We will simply leave. I had to do that for probably 18 months before the penny dropped that they weren't going to see their grandchildren much. So it's very important to have boundaries. Think them out clearly. Don't just say them off the top of your head, because boundaries need to be so well thought out that they are non-negotiable, and they will occur. The consequences of crossing the boundary will occur. So when you're salvaging a relationship with a parent or a sibling or whatever, um, you will need to have boundaries as well. They don't need to be hard and fast and said in a loud voice with, you know, a whole lot of emphasis. They just need to be expressed using the personal weather report. And the personal weather report, there's a couple chapters on it in my book, Kaizen for Couples. It's the second most important thing that I can offer anybody, in my opinion, is to help them master the personal weather report. It will change your communication and your conflict management forever when you do that. I hope that's helpful, Bubblegum. Alicia said, I don't feel like an adult, and I didn't feel like a child either. Oh, isn't that the conundrum of having hijackal parents? You're not allowed to have your childhood because they take it over. They parentify you. You become their parent. So you lose your childhood. And then they never let you have your adulthood because they're always intervening. So you're absolutely right, Alicia. And so you have to take that back, you know. It's really important to say, oh, no, you're not absconding with my adulthood. You're not absconding with my life. You're not upending my values. You're not changing how I live. I am in charge of that. And that's a big journey for many people. Ernesto says, you slice the salami very thin. Can you tell I have an Italian background? Yes. Meaning very clear and detailed understanding. Great episode as always. Grazie. Well, you are so welcome. Bubblegum says, since then, it's as if she has become a hijackal herself. Yeah, that's the problem. If your mother was an enabler for your hijackal father, she may have got what we call narcissistic or hijackal fleas. From being around them so much, she started to take on their behaviors in order to try and have some equity. It's all a very false and sad economy, but they do that. They turn into the hijackal in order to give the hijackal a piece of their own medicine, kind of thing. And then that becomes a double jeopardy for you, because now you have 2 people who are behaving like hijackals when you go home, and that's not great. Certainly not great. Simply Savvy said, too bad the attention span is so short for many. I'd be happier the longer you talk. Well, thank you. I'm glad that that's the case for you. But by making the podcast shorter, it gives us more time to talk. So that part's maybe helpful. Oh, you're welcome, Bubblegum, for sure. Alicia, why wouldn't an enabler want to be criticized? Is it the denial? Yes, of course, you're right. It's the denial. Because an enabler is looking for approval. An enabler is looking to people please. An enabler is making the consequences go away for the poor choices of someone else, meaning that they then take it on. They deal with it. They feel it. And so they don't want to be pointed out as enablers. It's very difficult. Now, learning that you're an enabler and doing something about it, that's a wonderful choice. But what I was responding to Bubblegum was you can't really go home and say, hey, you are an enabler and you're allowing all this to happen. And you did through my entire childhood. And I'm really angry about that. And I want you to take responsibility and apologize. But you can do that. But the enabler is not going to understand. You have to go in tiny little bits to be able to say, don't you think that there's a logical and natural consequence for his behavior? And then you make up for it and take away the consequence. Isn't that what being an adult is all about? You do something and it has a consequence and you learn from it. Well, the hijackal doesn't want to learn from it, but that's why I'm pointing out that you can't really tell an enabler what they're doing as blatantly as you'd like to, because you have to speak from your experience. Hence, go back to why you want to master the personal weather report. Alicia said, "Oh, I've been an enabler champion in my former life." Now, were you a champion enabler or were you the champion of the enabler, Alicia? That's an interesting discrepancy there. Simply Savvy says, with hijackals, the only way to salvage is to make peace yourself, accept how they will be and set your boundaries. Yes, so we agree. Great. You said it well. Bubblegum asks, what if the hijackal parents look for every way out of spending time with me when I ask? Well, that's not uncommon because they don't want to be criticized. And they probably, the hijackal particularly, isn't very interested in you if you won't do their bidding and you won't look for their validation and you won't tell them they're wonderful. So there could be very good reasons why hijackal parents don't want to spend time with you. And it's sad, it's horrible. My parents weren't very interested either. They wanted the grandchildren. They didn't really care very much about me. um, so I was the transportation for the grandchildren, I think. But they they're very entitled. They're very self-centered. So spending time with somebody else, unless it makes them look good, they're not very interested in that. Then add into that the fact that you might not be a happy camper about the way they raised you, and they don't want to hear about it. Well, that decreases the likelihood of them wanting to spend time with you, doesn't it? So in self-preservation, they have more important things to do than spend time with you, even if that means they're watching television. It doesn't really matter. So it's a good question, but that's what they do. Janet, hi, I haven't seen you make a comment before. So excited I caught you live. Great, me too. I've listened to you before. I love your wisdom, sweet, calming voice, and kindness and delight. I think you're great. Well, thank you, Janet. And she goes on to say your term hijackals in place of narcissists, Jezebels, you yeah, so many things. So many things they are for sure. Hijackals is the reason I created the term hijackals is I felt too many people were using the term narcissist for all people who were difficult. And narcissism is really a clinical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. So it's become very general, overused term for difficult people. And if you don't have a PhD in psychology like I do, diagnosing them is really not in your purview. So I thought, how can we solve that problem? Well, I can create a term that we can talk about all the patterns, traits, and cycles and behaviors without giving it a clinical diagnosis. But I did use the term narcissist for tonight because it is true. You have to stop striving to be good enough for a narcissist because it's impossible. So Simply Savvy said something to Bubblegum. Okay. Alicia said, my hijackal mother doesn't care that I don't engage with her. I'm no longer useful. Bam, you got it. That's exactly right. You don't have a use anymore. You're not promoting her ego or taking her orders or doing whatever she wants you to do. And so you become disinteresting to her. She's not going to fight that fight. She's going to go and find other people who agree with her. Simply Savvy, I like the term because so many people use the clinical term inaccurately. Exactly. That's exactly why I did it. Because hijackals can be passive aggressive people. They can be They can have traits of narcissism. They can have traits of psychopathy. They can have traits of sociopathy, any antisocial diagnosis. They could be borderline. They could be histrionic, the drama kings and queens of the world. But they're all going to affect us similarly. The same patterns, traits, cycles, and behaviors. There's very little difference among them in the DSM because they're just different traits in different piles, and how you pile them up gives you a different name for them. But one thing we know, they are toxic and relentlessly difficult, and we need to know that. So we'll call them hijackals when I'm around. Alicia said, I won't participate in shenanigans. Yay! She tries to hide her contempt, but it's all over her. I didn't notice how much she doesn't like me when I won't be happy and positive. Yeah, it's really wonderful when we start seeing our parents as humans rather than from wanting something from them or wanting them to like us or approve of us or whatever. I think it's always clear when I talk to my clients and say, well, she's my mother or he's my father. And I say, yeah, but if you met them at a networking event, would you invite them out to dinner? No. Okay, then. Think about it that way. You know, maybe we have some past and maybe we have some passions in common. Maybe we have some history in common. But do I want to spend my actual time with you now because I find you fascinating, lovable, interesting, and validating? No, not likely. So those things become important to notice, truly important to notice. And I hope you picked up on the piece tonight about perfectionism and how you can become perfectionistic in a hope of avoiding rejection by hijackals or other people. That if only I do things really, really well, they won't reject me. I'm going to do a whole thing on that in a month or so, because it's so very important to realize that even though we may think we're engaged in perfectionism, I think it is a much higher order to look at that we're actually endeavoring to avoid rejection. Okay. Janet said, it seems like mentally ill people have taken over our planet. So many people harmed by them. Yes, there are mentally ill people and there are personality disordered people. Those are two different groups. Many times we think that they're the same, but they're not. People who are mentally ill can be helped with medication. People who are personality disordered cannot. So there's a difference between a mental illness and a personality disorder. And we want to be clear about that. And that's probably way too much information, right? So Bubblegum said, very tough to process. It is. It takes a long time and often help. 3 years ago, before I was discarded by a hijackal ex, they would always initiate get-togethers with us. Even after I fought the false charges and won, now they're no longer interested. Wow. Yeah, because they want to rule the roost no matter what. They want to make you wrong. Alicia said, the most shocking part of hijackalness is the lack of reflection. Yeah, they don't have the ability to look inward, and even if they had the ability, they're not interested. I've spent years explaining how they should consider how their behavior impacts me and others, and they're saying, who? There is somebody here beside me. Basically, that's their thought. Don't tell me how I affect you. I'm only interested in how you affect me. Simply Savvy says, when it's hard to get perspective, I imagine myself on my deathbed looking back on my life and ask, what do I not want to regret? Exactly. You know, you may have heard me say that when people say to me, I haven't had any contact with a parent for 10 years and now they have a terminal diagnosis, what should I do? And my answer is twofold. What can you do without regret? And who are you? You know, if your makeup is that you understand that it would be best for you to go because you're a kind, compassionate person, that's great. And if your makeup says I'm a kind, compassionate person who knows how to avoid what I perceive as poison, then I won't go. And it's self-knowledge that makes the difference. Absolutely. And that question is, what can I do that I won't regret? Or what can I do without regrets? Alicia said, I thought my perfection would avoid their rejection. Yes, don't we all? Didn't we all? Let's put it in the past tense. Then I would get so hurt and devastated when eventually the goalpost would move with no lead up. It's really sad. It is. And it's perpetual. They just keep doing it. And we keep hoping they won't. We keep hoping they'll change. We keep hoping that if we're a little better and better and better, they will see it and they will behave differently. And they don't and they won't, which is why the tagline for tonight's episode was why even perfection can't and won't cut it with them. Just will not. Bubblegum says, thank you. I get so much out of your show. I'll visit your Patreon page. Great. Thank you very much for doing that. Also, those of you who are on YouTube, you can also use the YouTube super subscriber there. Be sure to subscribe if you want to know what I'm up to every Monday evening. Oren, sorry, having trouble with the light here. Good evening. I would have doubts about the hijackal wanting the grandchildren, especially if they grow up and do not idolize the hijackal. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, my kids did really like my father, and my father really liked the children. My father was a very covert hijackal, and he just really spent his time getting attention from being too ill, but he just loved to get away from my true hijackal mother and take the children to the pond or feed the ducks or go for a walk or do something. So it was kind of a double-edged sword kind of thing to go there, but the hijackal wanted the grandchildren so she'd have pictures to show everybody of her grandchildren, right? Remember, looks are everything. How it looks to the outside world is everything. So the children were useful because she could show off the pictures. Janet asks, are your parents still alive? The pain you survived made you help so many. Yeah, my parents have been gone since 1990. And so, no, they are not. I nursed them both at home 5 years apart to their deaths. And because I'm an only child and because I could, because they no longer could really hurt me the way that they had when I was growing up. I don't advise that for people who have not done their work and would still be hoping for validation. But yes, my parents are gone, and that actually freed me up to look at a whole lot of it a lot earlier than I probably would. I've told the story before on a podcast, Janet, that 3 days before my mother died, she was the second to go. I put my hand on top of hers because heaven, she wouldn't hold my hand. And I said, Mom, you've never told me that you love me. And she's lying in bed, wasting from cancer. And she looks down her nose and she says, I know. The hijackal smirk, right? Right to the last moment, we were going to have that. So we had it. I wasn't expecting anything else, but, who knows? Could happen. Um, yeah, thanks, Janet. Simply Savvy says, I feel sorry for hijackals. Imagine being neglected and abused as a kid to the point of never being able to perceive love or trust even when it's being poured on you. Yes, absolutely. We can have compassion for hijackals at a distance. Don't have compassion for them up close and personal too much, because the dynamic is not going to be what you want it to be. But absolutely, I know my parents' stories. I knew my grandparents. I knew my aunts and uncles. They were all hijackals, all of them. So it was not anything unusual that my parents should be hijackals too. And so it was the case that, yes, you can have compassion for someone's unfortunate story, but you don't jump into the story and live it with them, and you don't let them hurt you just because they were hurt. One of the things that I think of as a hero is a person who was abused when they were younger and they don't pass it on to their kids, right? That's heroic. And that's what we want to be, not passing it on to our kids. You know, I had a big chat with my kids. I have 3 of them. And they said, "Oh, you were nothing like Nana." You know, um, they have good memories. They didn't have anything bad to say about me. Whew. Maybe they say it when I'm not there, who knows? But, they did see the difference very clearly, and they were very grateful that I had not perpetrated those behaviors on them. So, Simply Savvy said, "You just have to know you can't save them. But the compassion helps in finding a healing and closure, knowing where it originates, not taking it personally." Yes, and that's the whole thing. Don't take it personally. It's really hard not to, but they would have done it to any child that came along. And whether you were the golden child, the lost child, the scapegoat child, whatever, they all did something to you, no matter which form you happened to get. But they perpetrated their unpleasantness and their unhappiness and their abuse on their children. So it's important to not take it too personally. It has nothing to do with who you are. It has everything to do with who they are. And that is a big separation that I help clients with, because it's hard. You think, of course, because you're a child, you think it's all about you. That's the way the brain growth lets you take that in, comprehend that. And so, you have some growing up to do when you step away and look at it differently, and then you can make great decisions for yourself. Bubblegum said, "Holy hell, I'm so sorry. Why are they so full of contempt? Because they were hurt." Yes, because they were hurt, because they don't know any differently, because they never got what they needed as a child, because life was difficult, complicated for them, so many reasons. However, they still chose to perpetrate it. And people ask me all the time, do hijackals know what they're doing? The answer to that is this: you can draw your own conclusion. If they can paint a public picture of perfection, and at home they can provide a private place of pain, do you think they're choosing what to do? Now, they may not have the skill level to do things differently. They may never entertain those things, but they know what to do. They even have the ability to produce what we call cognitive empathy. They don't have empathy. It doesn't well up automatically, but they have cognitive empathy. Oh, what does that empathy stuff sound like? When are you supposed to say it? What's the look on your face? So they have this cognitive idea, this thought through idea of what empathy is supposed to do, so that they can appear to have it. So these things are very, very difficult. Okay, Oren said, "I don't think every hijackal has a poor past. I think some of them are idolized as children and think they're perfect." Yes, but I would categorize that, Iron, as a poor past. Because if a child was idolized, They were never given a sense of reality. They were never given a sense of humility. So they weren't given those ideas. So I would think that was poor parenting. I really would. Simply Savvy. Oh, you're writing to Oren. Okay. Bubblegum says, I was also an only child. Yay, great club. How does one determine whether they are invisible or a scapegoat? Definitely treated like a burden. Yeah, well, as an only child, we get some of the goodies of most of those things. Like sometime we're the golden child because we make them look good. Sometimes we don't make them look good, so we become the scapegoat. They really don't want us around much of the time, so we become the lost child. So we take on all those roles at different times. It gets very confusing to our own identity because they're always changing the script. So it is important to do that work and figure it out. And it was very freeing to figure that all out. Oh, here's a new person. Miss Al says, my grandmother wanted me to babysit her, and I've had her with me for 9 hours. I have a 2-year-old. It was time for us to get home. She got upset, said my grandpa raped her, and that's why my dad is. Oh, well, she sure threw the kitchen sink at you all in a moment, didn't she? That's sad. Her story is sad. Um, but wow. So she wants you to take care of her, and she wants you to hear her story, and she wants you to stay because she doesn't like to be alone. Very difficult. That there's a lot in that. It is it sounds like she really needs to continue that conversation. Excuse me. Oren said, that's a great insight. I just struggle with the defranchisation of that, and maybe a child who idolized their childhood because they couldn't remember or raise me. Yeah, it would take a bit to figure that one all through. So we've come to the end of the comments, and I've come to the end of my ability to talk. I started with clients at 9 o'clock this morning, and obviously I am losing my voice. And before I have a coughing fit, and that won't be nice for you to enjoy, I am going to say good evening and remind you that take great care of yourself because you're precious and you matter. And I hope that you'll be here again soon. Good night.